Gators Breakdown, episode 32. We are ready to go, continuing our Outback Bowl coverage of the Florida Gators versus the Iowa Hawkeyes. And this time we're going to dive even further into the game and even further into the Iowa Hawkeyes with Jason. Jason's my guest this week, and he knows more about Iowa. When this matchup was announced, I forgot who tweeted me, but they said, David, you gotta have Jason in Nashville on your show because he knows more about Iowa than anybody I know. I forgot who said it, but I remembered that it was Jason in Nashville. So I got to get Jason on. So Jason, how you doing tonight? I'm glad you could join me.
Good day, Dave. Doing great.
Yeah. So, Jason in Nashville, that's how people know you on Twitter. But, give a little bit of background about yourself and how you come to know, Iowa football and all the knowledge you can share with us on Gators Breakdown.
Sure, be happy to. I know since 1999 when message boards pretty much originated, I've been a, active poster on the message boards. HawkeyeNation.com is a good website. In addition, the Iowa.rivals.com is a good Hawkeye website. The commonality that you and I both share is we both have a love for college football. We both have a love for the Bill King Show. I grew up in Iowa originally. I've been living in Nashville for the last 16 years. Currently, I'm a director of finance for a healthcare company. And when I'm not being a director of finance, I'm loving college football.
That's exactly, kind of sounds like, me like a little bit like when we were talking about that. We're your average Joe that love college football. And I think that's how, we can connect so well to our listeners and to our, on Twitter when we talk college football and our teams in particular. We're the average Joe talking college football. And I think that's why, everything goes as good as it goes.
Nope, exactly. I mean, you and I both have passion for college football, but, we each want our own team to win, but we kind of look beyond that. We kind of look in depth. We look at the quality of the characters of the coaches and the players and, realizing that, it's just a game and, good sportsmanship prevail.
For sure. So let's dive into this game a little bit. I mean, what was your feelings when the game was announced that I was going against Florida again?
My first initial reaction was this was a good matchup for Iowa. Florida kind of struggles on offense. Florida has a strong defense. Iowa has a good defense, and Iowa struggles on offense. So I think it's a good matchup for both teams. I think if Iowa was going to play, in LSU, we probably would have been a little bit more concerned with the running game, but now that Leonard Fournette is not going to play in the bowl game. But, I think really with Big Ten, SEC, there's kind of a misnomer between, both of the conferences with regards to speed and power football. But, in many ways, Auburn, LSU, even Alabama and Florida, I think they match up fairly well with most Big Ten teams.
Yeah, you're right. You look at those style of those teams, especially Alabama, LSU, Florida, they're kind of defense first and want to really pound the ball at you. So, yeah, if you look at, when people say when they used to look at Big Ten football, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, that's not so much the case anymore. But, when you look at the Big Ten and how they play and how Alabama, LSU, Florida play, they'd rather be more smash mouth and in the trenches type of play.
Exactly.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this preview a little bit. And I think the thing that struck me most about Iowa was how they ended the season. So after losing to Penn State, what changed for Iowa to go on that run at the end of the season where they beat, one of the best teams in the nation in Michigan and then basically destroyed Illinois and Nebraska?
Well, the thing about Kirk Ferentz coach teams is that he's matched up well against Michigan. You look at his overall record, he's actually has a winning record against Michigan. He's 7-5 against Michigan. But, more importantly, when one team gets a drubbing like that, that Iowa got against Penn State, it usually does one of two things for a team. It either brings them together or it pulls them apart. And I think with Iowa, even on the plane, there's stories about the players. They're talking about each other and say, hey, this isn't going to happen like this. This isn't how we want to be viewed or remembered. So players up and down the roster, they're committed to that same thing. Right before the Michigan game, Iowa linebacker Josie Jewell, who's one of our leading tacklers, he told C.J. Beathard right before the Michigan game that he believed that they would win. And Josie Jewell said that if Iowa scored 14 points, that the defense would hold Michigan under that. And sure enough, the Hawkeyes won 14-13. And keep in mind that the other two games Iowa won as well. The offense only scored 14 points against Rutgers and Minnesota, and that was enough for them to win. So when you look at this season and how they got on a hot streak, it's very similar to how the 2008 season ended for Iowa. their 10th game of the season was against a number 3 team at Kinnick Stadium in Penn State. And Iowa won that game on a last-second field goal, and then they proceeded to win their last 2 games, including a 55-0 win at Minnesota at the Metrodome. So, and then after that, they played South Carolina in the Outback Bowl. With South Carolina, that was a good matchup for Iowa because they didn't have good quarterback play at that time. You had, Steven Garcia that people knew about and Chris Snelly. So there's kind of, quarterback issues at South Carolina back then. But I think, Florida does have its issues with quarterback. But I think with Austin Appleby, he played more games than those South Carolina quarterbacks. So, we'll see for Iowa and Florida, see if 2016 ends like it did in 2008.
Yeah, you mentioned Austin Appleby there. I don't think it really helps too much, but he does have a little, experience with this Iowa team. He played against Iowa last year while he was at Purdue, in a loss, but his stats were okay in that game. But Austin Appleby does have some type of experience going against Iowa when he was at Purdue in that Big Ten school. You think there's anything? You think there's anything there Appleby, brings from last year's game to this to now quarterbacking for Florida?
Well, the thing about Iowa, Kirk Ferentz has used this term. He says we're not a sexy football team. Iowa is very predictable in many ways when you think about it. Their defense is a very base package. They're going to have 4 men on the defensive line. It's going to be kind of the same 4 people. They're going to be, they're not going to rotate as much. It's a very base, vanilla offense when you get down to it for Iowa. So it's really a matter of execution, as coach speak would say.
All right. So, having lost, I think, 4 straight bowl games for Iowa now, and then the disappointment of the Rose Bowl from last year, what would a bowl win mean for Iowa with the way they've ended this season, so far and going into this game now? What would a win mean for Iowa?
Well, for the graduating players at Iowa, they don't want to leave Iowa without winning a bowl game. They lost to LSU in the Outback Bowl. They got blown out by Tennessee at the Gator Bowl. They got ran over by Christian McCaffrey and Stanford at the Rose Bowl last year. One of the staples of Kirk Ferentz's teams, outside of that 2003 Orange Bowl against USC, which, albeit to a Pete Carroll team that we knew was going to dominate college football for those next few years, was that Kirk Ferentz coached teams. They had very good bowl preparation. But, that stigma's kind of taken a hit the last, 2 bowl games. So, even though Kirk Ferentz isn't going anywhere via the long-term contract till 2026, a bowl win would continue that momentum that we've seen from Iowa the last 3 games. With both Iowa and Florida, both teams had higher expectations entering this season. So from a fan's perspective, for me, following message boards for the last 16 years and kind of being a social, media participant, this has been a very quiet bowl game for Iowa. They're not really saying anything about the bowl game, but we know a bowl win does help to build momentum, entering the offseason as both teams look towards the future. And just about the Outback Bowl itself, this is always a matchup between, a solid Big Ten team and a solid SEC team. Personally, I've been to 3 of the 4 previous Outback Bowls that I was invited to, including that 2006 one versus Florida. So you have the activities leading up to the Outback Bowl, Clearwater Beach, New Year's Eve parade at Ybor City, the fan days at Busch Garden, Tampa Zoo, the weather, etc. So like I said, while the message boards may be somewhat calm, there'll still be about 15 to 20,000 Iowa fans in attendance for that game. And keep in mind, when the Outback Bowl had a choice between Iowa for the 5th time or inviting Nebraska for the very first time, we saw who the Outback Bowl chose.
Good point there. Yeah, really, really good point. And I think the matchups would have been fine either way. But these Florida-Iowa games in the past, with Ron Zook being coach at Florida and Urban Meyer was his first year at Florida when they pplayed Iowa, there was some good matchups we saw there. So the one key cog for Iowa is Kirk Ferentz. And you kind of alluded to it before, but obviously he does enough to keep his job at Iowa. And just when it looks like things may be falling apart, he found a way to start winning again and turning the program around. What is it about Ferentz that keeps him one of the longest tenured coaches in college football, and being able to keep Iowa, even when things go wrong, on the right track?
Well, if we know about Kirk Ferentz, he has long-term ironclad contracts with crazy buyout money. That's kept him there at Iowa. We have an athletic director in Gary Barta. He gave Kirk Ferentz a 10-year contract with 75% of the base salary guaranteed after Iowa won the Orange Bowl after the 2009 season. And then, despite being one of the highest paid coaches in the country, we saw, for the most part, very average football from Iowa between 2010 and 2014. That 2014 season for Iowa, there was no Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, or Penn State on the schedule, and Iowa finished 7-6. They got blown out by Tennessee. And to be honest, without that contract, I think Iowa would have looked in a different direction. And just so happened that in 2015, Iowa fans were, quote unquote, stuck with Kirk Ferentz. And then he just proceeds to go 12-2 and finish in the top 10 at the end of the season. One thing about Kirk Ferentz's team is usually when expectations are high, he usually flops, but when expectations are low, he usually overachieves. Another thing besides a contract is Iowa teams are known for player development. Dallas Clark was a walk-on, and he later became a Mackey Award winner, and he had a solid NFL career at tight end. And the Iowa strength in player development is at the line of scrimmage, and if you want to throw in the tight end position with that as well. So currently there's 22 Iowa players in the NFL roster, and 16 of them are on the line of scrimmage when you include tight ends in that calculation. And I think that ongoing success with the offensive line is why Iowa won the Joe Moore Award this season. I mean, this wasn't the best Iowa offensive line they've ever had. I think 2002 was probably the best offensive line Iowa had, with all 5 of those starters being drafted by the NFL. But it was those games against Michigan and Nebraska where the offensive line just worked so well in sync and so efficiently. Another thing about Coach Joe Moore with that Joe Moore Award, Coach Joe Moore actually did coach Kirk Ferentz at Pitt in the late 1970s. So Kirk Ferentz was encouraged and motivated, and really as a big influence. That's why you see that emphasis on line of scrimmage, and why Kirk Ferentz had success as a offensive line coach in the NFL. In Kirk Ferentz's early years, he got a phone call from Joe Moore, and Joe Moore called Kirk up and he said, "Hey coach, I have a player here. He has great potential and he can be a great player, but no one wants him. They don't think that he can play at this next level in Division I." That player was Bob Sanders, and he helped Iowa become known as the bullies of the Big Ten back then due to his hard-hitting defense and also that dominant offensive line that Iowa had back then. I think probably the third thing is Iowa's never really had a sniff of NCAA violations, except for that little weight room thing that happened a few summers ago. So I think player development, no NCAA violations, and the contract. I think those are the 3 things that really keeps Kirk Ferentz there.
Good deal, good deal. And and you've always heard rumors too that the NFL may come calling or whatever. But you mentioned the contracts and saying how it would cost somebody a good bit of money if they want to get Kirk Ferentz out of Iowa. So let's move to the game itself a little bit. Iowa should come in and try and establish the run with their running backs, Wadley and Daniels Jr., both who basically are 1,000-yard rushers. If they can't get the run game going, is there enough confidence in C.J. Beathard to get the job done versus this Florida defense, and in particular, of course, that Florida secondary with Jalen Tabor and Quincy Wilson?
Well, if you look at Iowa's record this year, they finished 8-4, and in those 4 losses, they rushed for 34, 79, 83, and 30 yards respectively. All 8 of those wins, the lowest rushing total they had was 164 yards. So it was very give me an A or give me an F when it comes to the running game. So if Iowa can run the ball, in my opinion, they'll probably win. If Iowa can't run the ball, I just don't see how they will win. We know Iowa's identity is running the football and having 2 rushers right now that right around 1,000 yards each, as you said. But if you look at Iowa's overall rushing offense, they're only ranked 74th out of 128 teams in FBS. But the thing that Iowa has been very successful at is in the red zone. They've scored on 35 of 38 trips, including 27 touchdowns, which ranks them 9th in FBS. On the flip side, if Iowa cannot get that running game going, their passing offense is virtually non-existent. I mean, they're ranked 115th out of 128 teams in FBS. The thing about Iowa's style of play is, Iowa doesn't attract high school athletes like a Percy Harvin to play, in the style of offense. So Iowa rely on 2- and 3-star Midwest wide receiver recruits that want to play at Iowa regardless of who the coach is. Matt Vandenberg was that perfect slot receiver, kind of like that Wes Welker or Tim Dwight. He was Iowa's best receiver, but he's out for the season, and Iowa's passing game has really struggled since. Iowa's second leading receiver is actually Akram Wadley, who's one of our running backs, who America got introduced to during the Michigan game. The thing that's very effective about Akram Wadley, he's very good rusher. I mean, he's averaging 6.6 yards per carry, which was the best in the Big Ten this season. And with, the limited Power 5 quality receivers that are on the Iowa roster, don't be surprised to see Wadley downfield catching passes. In addition, you'll see C.J. Beathard audible at the line quite a bit. I mean, he has veto power, whatever the call is from Greg Davis, the offensive coordinator. So, I think that might help out a bit.
I agree there. And so, I mean, if we move to the other side of the ball, and of course, we mentioned, and you kind of mentioned, the Florida offense is really not going to scare anybody. And when they've played good defenses this year, we saw it against LSU to where, they hit the one big play and that was enough to beat LSU. But then, of course, the week later, go to FSU and pretty much get controlled there with, Austin Appleby turning the ball over deep in their own territory, not being able to hit any big plays whatsoever. Florida couldn't run the ball. Florida can't run the ball. They can't get anything going. But the week later against Alabama, besides the back-breaking turnovers Austin Appleby had, he played pretty well, played one of his best passing games of the season where he actually dipped those for some yards against that Alabama defense. But I was just looking at for Iowa, in this, there's 7-0 when allowing under 160 rushing yards. I think that's a pretty good stat there for Iowa. And looking at what Florida does, because Florida, as I mentioned, if Florida can't get Jordan Scarlett going, I really think the offense is in trouble. And for Iowa, also on the defensive side of the ball, they've allowed 17 points or fewer in 4 of the last 5 games and 5 of the last 7. And, so this game looks like it's going to be a low scoring affair. One of your classic Big Ten top games there, and that's the way Florida has been winning games at points this year. But with that Hawkeye defense, being the rock that it was the last 3 games of the season, and only giving up about 205 yards per game against Michigan, Illinois, and Nebraska. I mean, those are the 3 games I think you have to look at for Iowa and the way they ended this season, because I think that's more of what you're going to see now. Is there anything Florida can do offensively to as much as you've watched Iowa? Is there anything Florida maybe can take advantage of against this Iowa defense that's been so solid lately?
Well, if Florida can't run the ball, I think where Florida can have some success is any matchup in which one of the Florida wide receivers is covered by one of Iowa's outside linebackers. You hear Ben Neiman and Bo Bauer, who are the 2 outside linebackers for Iowa. Can a DeAndre Goolsby have success like he had against Alabama? Also, in addition, Iowa's number 2 and number 3 cornerbacks in Greg Maben and Manny Rugamba. Manny Rugamba had that key 4th quarter interception against Michigan. Both of them won't be playing in the Outback Bowl. So Iowa's very thin in the defensive backfield. Desmond King will probably match up against Antonio Galloway, but, can Florida be effective with their number 2 and number 3 receiving options against, number 2 and number 3 backups for Iowa? So, like we said, we saw in the Alabama game, Florida was able to move the ball through the air despite, Austin Appleby throwing 3 interceptions. Like you said, with this Outback Bowl, we may see a game where Iowa gets 75% of their offense on the ground and maybe a Florida team that gets 75% of their offense through the air. Both teams, I think we were both humbled in our bowl games last year, and I just don't see that happening this year. Despite the score in the SEC championship game, I thought, Florida found some positives with their offense in that game. Plus with the 30-day layoff, between the SEC championship and the Outback Bowl, there'll be plenty of Florida Gators that, they've missed games this season, but they're going to be healed. They're going to be rested for this Outback Bowl. So, to me on paper, Florida should win with the talent versus Iowa. Iowa's a team that really doesn't out-talent many teams. It's really the fundamentals, the execution, etc. When Iowa's good, they have a solid line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They don't get penalized much. They don't turn the ball over. This season, for example, Iowa's only turned the football over 9 times this season. So with the game itself, it really depends, in my opinion, on who has the lead going into halftime. Both teams are very solid on defense. And because of that, it'd be hard for either team to overcome even just a 10-point deficit or more to overcome.
I agree there. And I think if you look at both of these quarterbacks, and then Austin Appleby and Beathard, it's neither one of these quarterbacks more than likely are going to win the game. But I think which one won't lose the game. In a way, I think you've seen Austin Appleby against FSU and fumbles in their deep territory. And we mentioned the 3 interceptions against Alabama. That's going to be, I think, one of the deciding factors of Austin Appleby can hold on to the ball, not turn the ball over. And mentioned that Iowa doesn't turn the ball over a lot. So can Florida's defense maybe force some turnovers at some point in this game?
Correct. Yeah, I think turnover battle because of the lack of offense on both sides of the ball. Lack of offense for both Florida and Iowa. Strong defense for both Florida and Iowa. I mean, yeah, really a turnover ratio is going to be very key in this game.
All right. Well, that will do it for Gators Breakdown episode 32. Jason, man, I can't thank you enough for joining and sharing your knowledge on the Iowa Hawkeyes for this Outback Bowl preview.
No problem. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you much. So you can catch Gators Breakdown on SoundCloud and iTunes. You may have been watching live here on YouTube, but thanks for joining us. We'll have some more after the holidays. We'll take some few days off for the holidays. So to all of you out there listening or watching, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. We will see you guys right before the Outback Bowl.